A well-known judge and attorney are in the spotlight tonight.
It has to do with a newly released police file about the death of a young woman last year, a death police later ruled a suicide. Tonight, the I-Team's Natalie Amos joins us with the first of several reports. Nancy?
Well, police first considered the death of this woman suspicious because of threats that police were told she made before her death. Threats to expose a judge and a lawyer, and that prompted police to look deeper. Friends of Lee Terry say she had it all. She was beautiful, smart, classy, from a Belmead family, her father a surgeon. But there was a dark side, her friends say. She drank and mixed alcohol with prescription drugs. A series of drunk driving charges landed her in the court system. Her interactions with a judge and a defense attorney and a trip to Mobile, Alabama became part of a police investigation into her death.
911 was the exact location of your emergency.
May 25, 2016, a maintenance man at the Stallman building in downtown Nashville calls 911.
I'm pretty sure that maybe somebody passed away.
Lee Terry was found on her bed, a Smith & Wesson handgun similar to this one at her temple. Police later established she'd been dead about 3 weeks. Metro Police conducted an investigation that would take months. They eventually concluded it was a suicide. But during the investigation, witnesses whose statements were recorded by Metro detectives recounted threats that they say Terry had made in Alabama, threats to expose 2 of the men on that trip, General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland and his friend, defense attorney Brian Lewis.
No, you can sit wherever you want. You can sit. Yeah.
Lewis was interviewed the day after Terry's body was found. The apartment where she was found, both her name and Lewis's name are on the lease.
Yeah, I co-signed the lease, I think, around beginning of April.
Terry listed Lewis as her boyfriend for the emergency contact. They both had keys. Lewis would confirm something in a second interview a month later. It was recorded at Central Precinct. He confirmed that he and Terry had a sexual relationship. Lewis is married.
It would be classified a friend and a friend with benefits. Had I had sex with her on occasions? Yes.
The relationship began, he had said in the earlier interview, after Lee Terry was his client.
I'll give you the whole history if you want it.
All right.
Met Lee about 3 years ago, represented her for free in a DUI case. She was in with a whole group of friends.
This is the paperwork on file at the clerk's office. Lewis represented Terry on a 2013 drunk driving arrest, a DUI second offense. The charge was reduced to reckless driving in General Sessions Court. She got 6 months probation. Court records show Judge Casey Moreland terminated her probation early. He's the same judge on the Alabama trip just days before Lee Terry's suicide. It was a trip that witnesses say turned awkward, ending with Lewis sending Terry home early.
She was just mad that whole day. It was one of those deals where she was just mad that whole day and was just abusive towards everybody.
Terry's friend, Natalie Amos, was on that trip. She says Terry was arguing with Lewis.
Very heated.
Okay.
She and Brian are yelling at each other.
In the second interview, the Metro detective asks Lewis about text messages Terry sent Lewis that night. Texts, he said, threatened to reveal intimate relationships between he and Terry and between Natalie Amos and Judge Moreland, who was also married.
Because she said in there that she was going to expose Casey and Natalie's relationship and on the text, and that she was going to talk about to your wife.
Yeah.
Did she do any of those things?
No, she did not. I took that as an idle type threat from her, something that was made in the heat of the moment, and that that she wouldn't follow through with.
But Natalie Amos thought there was something more to the threat than just jeopardizing marriages. Terry had been working at Lewis's law office. Amos says during the trip, Terry threatened to reveal something she had recently discovered that she said could ruin Lewis personally and professionally.
And she said, okay, I hope you're ready. She's like, I will ruin you. And she said, I know things that, she's like, you all both know what I'm talking about. She was very adamant that she knew she had information that would the way that it came across was that could really blow up his life.
2 months after Terry's body was discovered, detectives interviewed Judge Moreland at his office in the courthouse. Police confirmed the judge's interview was not recorded. The detective's notes indicate Moreland was asked about Terry's threats. Moreland said he thought she would calm down and come to her senses. He says he felt sadness about her death. The detective's investigation concluded that Terry did in fact commit suicide using a gun owned by Brian Lewis. As our I-Team investigation continues, you'll hear our exclusive interview with the woman on that DVD, Natalie Amos, Terry's friend and former roommate.
And she's gone. And, yeah, I'm scared. And I was quiet for almost a year.
Natalie Amos had DUI charges of her own. We'll look into whether court procedures were circumvented and hear how Amos says it was Lee Terry who first suggested the judge could help her.
And she said, well, I can call Casey. And I was like, Casey? She said, Judge Moreland.
Did you ever go to court?
No.
It just disappeared.
Yes.
And you'll hear what she says her friend Lee Terry told her about her own interactions with Judge Moreland.
She was like, Natalie, I was out of options. It was that, or I was looking at serious jail time.
You'll see the judge's reaction when we approach to ask questions. Now, we've made a number of attempts to do an on-camera interview with Judge Moreland. So far, he has declined, and so has Brian Lewis, who told me we would hear from his attorney. As my I-Team investigation continues tomorrow at 6, my interview with Natalie Amos. It's a story you'll see only on Channel 4.
There is already fallout from a Channel 4 I-Team investigation into a well-known Nashville lawyer and judge. Today, a formal complaint was filed with the Board of Professional Responsibility against both Judge Casey Moreland and attorney Brian Lewis.
As the I-Team first reported last night, it all started with the death of a woman named Lee Terry. Police concluded she killed herself last spring. The detectives' report into her death is now public. And now so are allegations that sexual favors may have affected the outcome of court cases. The I-Team's Natalie Amos joins us now with the latest in her investigation.
Well, General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland was interviewed by Metro detectives after Lee Terry's death. He was one of the people who was with Terry on a trip to Alabama last year. Now, we've been trying to interview him about allegations that came out in this police investigation, and we've been trying to ask him about another woman's court fines and how they disappeared. This may be the last video taken of Lee Terry alive. Security camera footage from the Stallman building. It's now in the evidence vault. Police say the night of May 4th, 2016, Terry walked her dog Lana one last time, went into her 9th floor apartment alone, then shot and killed herself. A detective's investigation would discover Terry had returned just a few days earlier from a trip to Mobile, Alabama.
Just know that she was irate.
Natalie Amos was on that trip. What was supposed to be a fishing weekend ended prematurely for Terry. Eyewitnesses told police Terry kept arguing with her traveling companions, especially Brian Lewis. He's the man police would discover was paying her rent at the Stallman. Lewis told police during a recorded interview they were friends with benefits. Amos told police Terry had threatened to expose an affair between Terry and Lewis and threatened to divulge something she had recently seen on Lewis's computer.
She threatened him, and she's like, the gig's up, and she said, and I'm not talking about your wife.
Amos at first didn't want to name another person who was on the trip, Judge Casey Moreland, a close friend of attorney Brian Lewis.
I know you don't want to mention somebody, but I
If you need
just need to know who we're talking about.
Casey Moreland.
Okay.
But Moreland's name was in the spotlight in the detective's report. During the investigation into Terry's death, allegations were made by Amos and 2 of Terry's former boyfriends. Their interviews are in the police file. All say Terry claimed she had had sex with Moreland in his office in exchange for a lighter sentence on a DUI case.
She was like, Natalie, I was out of options. It was that, or I was looking at serious jail time.
We were not able to independently confirm the allegation. Court records show that Moreland was not the judge when Terry's charges were reduced. We do see Moreland's stamp on a document appearing to cut her probation short by a few months.
lost.
Natalie
my
Amos has a
criminal
history of
record.
drunk driving charges, too.
I got 2 DUIs back to back.
She says that in 2015, she was struggling to pay her fines, $1,200, and mentioned it to her friend Lee Terry.
And she said, well, I can call Casey. And I was like, Casey? She said, Judge Moreland.
The three met at Pinewood Social. Amos says she was hoping to get more time to pay the fines since she was working.
I was just really honest with him, and I'm like, obviously I shouldn't have procrastinated. I've been calling, and I'm kind of screwed here. I just need like 4 weeks, and I can pay this off. And he just is like writing and not saying anything, and I'm like, so if you could just tell me who to call, that'd be so helpful. And he's like, that's what I'm doing. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I'll be quiet. And then he just said, text me, this information. And I did. And I just really thought I was going to get an extension. And it just went away.
The court's computer system shows that on July 14, 2015, her fines were all waived. Natalie was declared an indigent. She didn't have to pay anything, even though she had a job.
Be granted, Shirley, you may go.
Forgiving fines isn't that unusual. In fact, we did a story in August 2015 about how many fines Judge Moreland waived. There is a process. Someone fills out a form listing their income. The judge reviews it and says yes or no. Natalie Amos says she never went to court, never filled out that form.
No.
Nothing.
No. And I didn't even know about that until today, honestly.
There's a form you were supposed to fill out to say
Right.
you are applying for indigency.
I didn't know about that until today.
Did you ever go to court?
No.
It just disappeared.
Yes.
I checked, and Amos's name wasn't on the docket that day. There is a motion for indigency in the court file. It's only signed by Casey Moreland, and there's no date. Natalie thanked the judge by text messages. She saved the text she says Moreland sent her in exchange. Your fees, fines, and court costs are taken care of. Now you officially owe me. Ha ha.
When I got that text, and I was like, okay. I see.
She says she didn't play ball. There was no quid pro quo. But she says she and Moreland did have an intimate relationship later. The I-Team approached Judge Moreland. We had a lot of questions.
This looks like the firing squad.
We asked for an interview about the Alabama trip, about Lee Terry, and about Natalie.
Natalie Amos.
We asked to sit down and talk on camera.
All right, well, let me try to figure out what a good time would be.
Okay.
We've continued to press the judge for an interview. He declined. He did send a statement to the Nashville scene regarding Lee Terry and Natalie Amos, saying, quote, "At no time did I intervene on their behalf during or after judgments were rendered by the appropriate courts." The statement goes on to say, while I had limited acquaintance with both Miss Terry and Miss Amos, I never had an improper relationship with either of them. As our I-Team investigation continues, we'll show you many more text messages Natalie says she exchanged with the judge, and you'll want to see them. Now, my investigation into those text messages airs Friday at 6.
Metro Police confirm they checked on the welfare of a judge today who's been at the center of a Channel 4 I-Team investigation. Judge Casey Moreland was scheduled to preside in court today. Eyewitnesses tell us he arrived early, before 9 o'clock, and was rushed out of his court by one of his officers. Judge Gail Robinson also confirms that Moreland called him last night and asked him to fill in and hear his docket today. Now, it's unclear why Moreland was briefly in court when he had already asked another judge to step in. Metro Police say they were asked to conduct a welfare check on Judge Moreland this morning and found him okay. And there are more questions tonight about what happened in the court presided over by Judge Casey Moreland.
Now the I-Team has confirmed a Sheriff's Department investigation is underway into a relationship between a former deputy in Moreland's court and a woman sentenced to Moreland's drug court program. A relationship the judge himself was told about but did not report to police. Chief Investigative Reporter Jeremy Finley is here with the latest in our investigation.
So here's the reason, guys, why the Sheriff's Department has to investigate any report of a relationship between a staff and an inmate.
The law reads an inmate can't consent to sexual relations with a deputy, that the deputy is considered an authority figure, and the Sheriff's Department policy forbids romantic relationships. So why then did neither police nor the Sheriff's Office hear about this so-called relationship from the judge, who admits he was more than told about it? Desiree Moss is the first to admit her relationship with Lucas Frawley, displayed on social media, raises eyebrows.
We understand our relationship is weird. We understand that it came out weird, but I mean, it is what it is.
After all, while Moss was in and out of Casey Moreland's court on drug charges, the deputy specifically assigned to escort inmates in that court was Lucas Frawley.
He took me to jail 3 or 4 times.
Listen to this. Moss was last in the Davidson County Jail in November. On January 9th, Frawley resigned from the Sheriff's Office. 2 weeks after that, the two were engaged. At some point, this picture was posted online, reading free and clear, and it feels so good. Don't you see that looks a little questionable?
I understand that it's questionable.
And speaking of questionable, we showed them what we'd obtained. Facebook and text messages that Frawley and Moss admit they sent to 2 different people. She wrote, "All that matters is that he is out and didn't get charged." He texted, "It's all good, got swept under the rug." You say, "It's all good, got swept under the rug."
Yeah, so that was my attempt at playing with the people that run that site.
That site is this, a blog criticizing the Sheriff's Department. And the intention of these messages, they say, was to see if it would show up on the blog. Why send misinformation?
I thought it was amusing.
But Frawley quickly learned people in the courthouse weren't amused. And he says Judge Moreland was told about the rumors of their relationship.
He just basically came to me and told me about the rumors. And that was the extent of the conversation.
So consider that. A sitting criminal court judge who heard about a rumored relationship between his deputy and an inmate. A relationship, if proved true, would violate the Sheriff's Department's own policy and perhaps the law if they'd had sexual relations. So what did the judge report to police and to the Sheriff's Office? Nothing. The Sheriff's Office confirms they started investigating on a tip from someone else, and police have no investigation into Frawley. We just wanted to be able to try to talk to you for fair and accuracy purposes. We wanted to interview the judge about what he knew about this now engaged couple. If you had any knowledge of that relationship. Despite repeated requests, Moreland has denied to do an on-camera interview. But the judge told me over the phone he wasn't just told about the rumors, he was shown a sexual photograph of Moss and Frawley together. He says he told Frawley to resign, and that he thought Frawley would tell the Sheriff's Department. But listen to what Frawley says about that. The judge said that he told you you needed to resign. Is that true?
No.
You had a little hesitation there.
Casey Moreland is a good guy, and I don't want to speak out against him. I would never. It's a great individual.
Plus, Frawley and Moss say there was nothing for the judge to report, because they say they had no relationship while they were in his court.
Not while I was in custody, not at all. Not while I was in drug court.
Here's what they say, that they did have a fling before she was arrested. And yes, just 2 weeks after he resigned, they got engaged, but they say nothing happened in between. Doesn't that seem to be some questionable timing?
Well, we can call it strange all you want, but I mean, that's exactly what it is.
Okay, so what is a judge required to do? Well, the law reads a judge must only report misconduct of other judges or attorneys, but it also reads a judge must require his staff to act in a manner consistent with the judge's obligations. To see our full investigation so far, just go to WSMV.com. I'm Jeremy Finley for the Channel 4 IT.
Metro General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland is stepping aside from his position as presiding judge.
He'll still be hearing cases as a judge, but not serve in the head administrative role. More on that new development in just a moment. But first, our Channel 4 I-Team investigation continues. Tonight, it concerns sexting and questions of favorable treatment. Nancy Amos is here with the latest.
Well, we have uncovered documents that appear to show that Judge Casey Moreland helped a woman he knew avoid paying traffic fines, in addition to waiving fees she owed the court. And a warning, there is mature content in our story.
I mean, my $1,200 was just gone.
Natalie Amos isn't talking about a robbery. She's talking about a windfall. $1,200 in court fines from her DUI cases forgiven, wiped clean. By this order, signed by General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland. Court records show he declared her indigent, unable to pay, even though she was working, and says she didn't ask for a waiver, didn't fill out any forms, or go to court.
And I just really thought I was going to get an extension, and it just went away.
Amos says she had met Moreland at a downtown restaurant, the introduction made by her friend Lee Terry. The same Lee Terry whose suicide last year was investigated by Metro Police. Terry had been on a trip with attorney Brian Lewis and Judge Moreland.
Plea petition she signed.
The court's computer system show Amos's fines were waived July 14, 2015. That same day, Amos says, she got a text from the judge. Your fees, fines, and court costs are taken care of. You now officially owe me. Ha ha. Amos says there was no quid pro quo, no sexual favors exchanged, but she says their relationship later turned sexual.
But you became lovers eventually.
Eventually we did, yes, about a year later.
3 months after the court fines disappear, November 24, 2015, Amos texts Moreland about problems she's having getting her license back. It's because of money she owes the Department of Safety over traffic tickets. Moreland texts her, I may can help in Davidson County. He reminds her to send a picture, and she does. They exchange suggestive comments. He says, so you want me to give you a little attention, and mentions a midday quick and dirty. So what happened to the tickets? We found these records at the traffic court clerk's office. November 4, 2016, Judge Moreland writes a letter directing the clerk to pull the tickets and place the citation on the traffic docket coming up in 4 days. He directs the clerk not to subpoena the officer. The case is retired with no fines due.
I'm very grateful when people are in a position to help me, and sometimes everyone needs help.
Natalie texts the judge the following week mentioning the tickets and tells Moreland, thanks so much for your help, much appreciated. Moreland texts, they are gone, ha ha ha. Amos writes, I know, that's crazy. Moreland asks about meeting at her apartment the next day. What are you doing tomorrow between 3:30 and 5:30? Just be horny and naked, the text says. Then Moreland's texts go into details that we can't say on TV. November 16th, the next day, Moreland texts that he's almost at her apartment and asks, want me to come around the back? We've been asking Judge Moreland for an interview about Lee Terry and Natalie Amos.
We try to figure out what a good time would be.
Okay.
So far, he's declined.
Now, we've been asking Judge Moreland to address these texts for more than a week with no reply.
How many times do you think police officers hear this from people they pull over? I know so-and-so.
Our Channel 4 I-team found it worked when a judge intervened in a traffic stop for a female friend. Nancy Amos joins us now with more on the investigation.
Well, what happened was the end result was a woman was allowed to drive away on a revoked license after Judge Casey Moreland made a phone call. And we want to warn you, there is some adult content in the end of the story.
The dreaded blue lights, you're being pulled over. If you have friends in high places, maybe you're not getting a ticket or going to jail. Well, that's what happened here on 6th Avenue South downtown on June 16th at 3:20 in the afternoon. Motorcycle officer Michael Douglas of Central Precinct tells me he's just starting his shift when he notices a woman driving without a seatbelt and her tags are expired.
93.6 Peabody, Tennessee.
He calls dispatch to find out if she has a valid driver's license. She doesn't.
Comes back to a Natalie Amos, D. David, revoked.
She's Natalie Amos, a very close friend of General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland. She says she calls the judge, then they send a series of text messages back and forth. She shared what she said were the texts between them. Moreland texts her, find out the officer's name. She writes, Michael Douglas. Moreland writes, if I need to talk to him, I will. She texts Moreland that the officer is running her license, adding, it's the last thing I need right now. Moreland texts, I gotcha, girl. Then he texts, what's happening? Did you drop my name? But the officer continues to write her a ticket until Moreland makes a phone call to the officer's supervisor at Central Precinct. Metro Police verify what happened next in a written statement. That Sergeant Mark Byrne, Douglas's supervisor, was contacted by Judge Moreland. Police say Moreland tells the sergeant that Amos was on the way to his office for a meeting. The statement says Byrne perceived that Judge Moreland wanted the motorist to be allowed to continue to his office. Byrne rides his police motorcycle over to where Amos is stopped to convey that message to the officer. Moreland texts Amos that help is on the way, and she writes, "Sweet." Amos is allowed to drive away on a revoked license. She doesn't get a citation for it, just the ticket for no seatbelt and expired tags. As we've been reporting in our investigation into Judge Moreland, it isn't the only time the judge acted on Amos's behalf. That ticket for the seatbelt and registration violation, Moreland sent the traffic court clerk a letter recalling the ticket. She didn't have to pay it. It was retired. And we told you Judge Moreland helped erase $1,200 in old court fines that Amos owed. He declared her indigent, even though she had a job.
I mean, my $1,200 was just gone.
So what kind of business did Amos have with Moreland at his office the day she was stopped by the motorcycle officer? Amos showed us texts she said were between her and Moreland. The texts back and forth show they didn't have a meeting planned, no official business. In fact, when she was stopped, Amos was on her way to meet the judge at a bar called the Batter's Box. After they met for drinks, Amos said they did go back to the courthouse to have sex in Moreland's office. Moreland texts her at 6:30 that night, "Damn, you're hot." The next afternoon, Amos texts that she's super grateful for his help. The judge texts, "Just used my superpowers." And then, "My desk still has butt marks on it."
Now, I've reached out to Judge Moreland a number of times asking for an interview. He declined. He hired a lawyer 2 days ago, Warwick Robinson, and here's what Robinson told me this morning. "I don't have any comment at this time. Being new to this, I'm still doing my own review of all the information out there."
After weeks of not responding, the sheriff's investigators, Judge Casey Moreland today started answering questions.
The elected judge had not returned investigators' repeated calls about his former deputy until now. The I-team first exposed the sheriff's investigation into alleged improprieties about that former deputy who worked in the judge's own court. Not long after the deputy resigned, he became engaged to an inmate he had repeatedly escorted into court. The judge confirmed to the I-team that not only was he told about the relationship, he actually saw some sort of intimate photograph of the two. Chief Investigative Reporter Jeremy Finley is here with more on what investigators want to know.
So what they're trying to determine is if this relationship crossed the line. Was it physical or romantic while the deputy and the inmate were in the judge's court? If true, it could be deemed a crime. So what did the judge know? And could this photo he saw be used as evidence in the investigation? Today, investigators finally got some answers. Davidson County Sheriff's investigators say they first reached out to Judge Casey Moreland on January 26th. After more than 2 weeks of repeatedly reaching out, Judge Moreland finally responded. A Sheriff's Department spokeswoman emailing the I-team, Judge Casey Moreland reached out to the Sheriff's office today and answered questions in regards to our ongoing administrative investigation of former employee Lucas Frawley. To be clear, Judge Moreland is not and has never been the subject of this administrative investigation. But what he knows is key. The investigation into the relationship between the judge's former deputy, Lucas Frawley, and inmate Desiree Moss is important for one major reason. If it can be proved they were physical or romantic while he was employed and she was an inmate, it breaks the Sheriff's Department's own policy and could be a criminal offense because deputies are considered authority figures.
She was not in a position to consent to any type of relationship with a sheriff deputy.
This former employee of the Sheriff's Department corresponded with Desiree Moss on Facebook. He considers himself a whistleblower and asked us to conceal his identity so he can continue to mine for information. In those Facebook conversations, Moss at first denied their relationship, but later changed her tune, asking if she could sue the Sheriff's Department.
She messaged me out of the blue and said, "I have the proof, it's true. I have been having a relationship with a sheriff deputy."
Moss denies their relationship was romantic while she was in Moreland's court, even though they got engaged 2 weeks after Frawley resigned. She says she had the Facebook conversation for fun, just to see if it would show up in a blog criticizing the sheriff's department. But it's a pretty serious subject to be joking around about.
Never once did it say that me and him had a physical relationship.
Judge Moreland himself told me by phone that he was troubled when he first heard the rumor of the relationship involving his court's deputy and saw some sort of sexual photograph of Frawley and Moss and told Frawley to resign. But the judge never went to the sheriff or the police. When I asked why, he said he thought Frawley would tell the sheriff. Frawley confirms he sent this text to another person writing about getting in trouble for the relationship. It all got swept under the rug. This is you.
That was me 100%.
But you're joking.
Yes.
What also caught this former sheriff's employee's attention was who liked the engagement announcement on Facebook, Judge Moreland's own son.
Now the judge's son is liking the posting. I thought that was troubling.
Now, I did just receive a statement from Moreland's attorney, Warwick Robinson, who wrote, Judge Moreland learned for the first time today that the Sheriff's Department wanted to speak to him. Prior to today, Judge Moreland was aware that the Sheriff's Department had spoken with members of his office about Frawley, but was not aware the Sheriff's investigators needed to speak with him personally. Since it's an ongoing investigation, it would not be appropriate to comment further, except for to say that Mrs. Moss was not incarcerated, nor was she enrolled in the drug court program when Judge Moreland learned of their relationship. As for Jay Moreland liking the engagement post, Robinson wrote that Jay Moreland and the former deputy are longtime work acquaintances, and it does not suggest that anyone in the Moreland family had knowledge of this relationship. Tom?
Jeremy Finley tonight. Jeremy, thanks. We're also learning more tonight about how Judge Moreland altered the 2013 sentence of a woman he knew after she had been convicted of DUI. Moreland said he recused himself in the case of Lee Terry because he knew her. But that's not what we see in newly released probation documents obtained by the Channel 4i team. Here's Natalie Amos.
The DUI case of Lee Terry has been under a lot of scrutiny. That's because during a police investigation into her suicide last year, allegations were raised that Terry had sex with a judge in exchange for favors in her DUI case.
Lee Terry committed suicide in May in her apartment at the Stallman building, according to police. Police asked her friends a lot of questions. Their statements are in the detectives' files. Several friends told police that Terry said she'd had sex with Moreland in chambers to get out of a DUI. The court papers show that Judge Holt presided over Terry's 2013 DUI trial, not Moreland. But court papers show that Judge Moreland did, in fact, intervene in her case. He shortened her probation by about 2 months. And Moreland wrote that Terry didn't have to undergo any drug screens. We also verified that Terry was supposed to go to jail for 5 days as part of her plea bargain. But the Sheriff's Department confirms she never showed up for jail. So why didn't anyone follow up? Well, today court officials tell us there was a mistake in the probation office. It slipped through the cracks.
I've reached out to Moreland's attorney, Warwick Robinson. He told me there are some justifications for what occurred that will be discussed at the appropriate time and place. For the I-Team, Natalie Amos, Channel 4 News.
It's the last thing you'd expect from a judge, texting derogatory comments and taking a picture of defendants.
But when the Channel 4i team combed through thousands of texts Judge Casey Moreland sent a woman, we found he was sending some of them directly from the bench during hearings. Chief Investigative Reporter Jeremy Finley is here now with the latest.
These texts were shared by a woman who knows Moreland well. She says they've been in a sexual relationship. And what these texts show is among the reasons a judicial expert believes Casey Moreland should step down. There are a whole lot of texts between Judge Casey Moreland and his friend Natalie Amos that are so sexually explicit we can't show you on television. But we can show you what the judge sent her while he was in the business of dispensing justice on dockets for human trafficking and drug addiction. At one point, Amos sent a Bitmoji to pay attention to her. The judge's response, "Just been working, sorry. My hoes in court keep me busy." It's a term he uses again, texting on another day. Tuesdays and Wednesdays are my busy days, hoes and junkies.
That raises yet another problem.
The Channel 4i team showed the texts as well as all of our previous investigations into Casey Moreland to law professor Charlie J.
I do.
A Carnegie Fellow who has testified before the U.S. Senate as an expert on judicial ethics.
If you were using disparaging terms to characterize people who appear before you on a pretty regular basis, it suggests that you harbor a bias against them that calls your impartiality into question.
We also show Jay how we found again and again the judge text Amos for personal reasons while he's holding court, even while listening to information about a wiretap and in a hearing on a cocaine case. At one point, he sends her a picture of the defendants before him.
The business of being on the telephone in the middle of court proceedings is itself a problem.
The text between Moreland and Amos reveal that the judge intervened when Amos was stopped by police, that the judge helped dismiss her tickets, and erased more than $1,000 in court fines that Amos owed.
I think it's still very problematic because judges need to be mindful of the power they exercise and not to use that power for their own personal advantage.
Bottom line, do you think this judge needs to resign?
If what is reported here is true, this may not be a judge who is well suited to the bench. And so I think that the best bet is to step down.
So I want to show you what's written in the Tennessee Code of Judicial Conduct. In the preamble, it reads, judges should maintain the dignity of judicial office at all times and avoid both impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in their professional and personal lives. Now, we shared all of these texts with Moreland's attorney, and we have yet to hear back from him.
Well, her death was ruled as suicide, but what came out during the Metro Police investigation into Lee Terry's death has become a much bigger story.
It launched our Channel 4i team investigation on influence, infidelity, and men in power. Lee Terry was found dead last May after returning from a trip that involved a Nashville judge and a prominent attorney. Tonight, Terry's friends have a lot of questions about her death. The Channel 4i team's Natalie Amos is with us.
Well, details in the police file into the death of Lee Terry raised a lot of questions about Judge Casey Moreland and attorney Brian Lewis and their interactions with two of the women on the trip, one of whom police say committed suicide the following week. Now, a number of her friends have raised questions about her death. We wanted to explore them because so many of our viewers have asked the same questions.
34-year-old Lee Terry ended her life with a gunshot wound to the head May 5th in her downtown apartment. A suicide, Metro Police concluded. Several of Terry's friends who gave interviews to police say it doesn't ring true.
Lee Terry never would have killed herself. Not like that.
John Nichols had been Terry's friend for 10 years.
I just didn't believe it. I mean, Lee really enjoyed being Lee. I mean, she was a big fan of Lee Terry.
Roy Matlock dated Terry in 2015.
I just wanted it investigated, really investigated.
Police listed 20 reasons for concluding the death was a suicide. Friends said she had discussed suicide before. There was no sign of a forced entry, no significant evidence to suggest foul play. Video surveillance showed Terry was alone when she left the elevator the night of her death. And the scientific evidence. Bloodstain experts found no evidence of anyone in close proximity to the victim when the gun was fired. Terry's body wasn't found for about 3 weeks on May 25th. Matlock says as soon as he heard, he went to the police with his concerns.
I went down there on the 29th of May and very clearly stated that I thought that there was foul play.
The week before her death, Terry had returned from a trip to Alabama, one that included Brian Lewis. He's a well-known Nashville attorney. Lewis was paying Terry's rent at the Stallman building. He told police they had a sexual relationship.
A big group of us went to Mobile. Lee was acting extremely erratic.
The Alabama trip ended in an argument. Witnesses say Lewis dropped Terry off at a Mobile hotel and gave her money to fly home alone. That was April 27th.
That's the last I heard from her.
Surveillance video would show that after the Mobile trip on May 3rd, Lewis came to the Stallman to pay Terry's rent. The video shows he went to the office on the first floor, then left without going upstairs. That was the last time police found Lewis used his swipe card to enter the building.
She was there for 21 days in an apartment that was rented by, Brian Lewis, and he didn't think to check on her. Well, there's just so many things that don't make sense to me.
The detectives asked Lewis why he didn't check on Terry. Lewis said he wasn't going to contact her until she apologized for being rude on the trip. And Lewis said he figured she'd gone back to an old boyfriend, the one who flew down to pick her up in Alabama.
Yeah, Lee will come back around when she wants to.
Detectives interviewed that former boyfriend. He told detectives that Terry told him if anything happened to her, they did it. It's unclear who she meant. Metro Police worked the case for 5 months. They checked surveillance video, phone records, interviewed witnesses, ran ballistics tests, and fingerprints. But some of Terry's friends thought they should have looked more closely into threats that Terry made on the trip. Witnesses told police Terry threatened to expose something she said she knew about Lewis and about Judge Casey Moreland. Natalie Amos is Terry's former roommate. She was on the Alabama trip. Amos told police Terry told her about something she said she'd seen on Lewis's computer, something Terry said could really blow up Lewis's life.
Like she had just walked in the door and sat down, and she's like crying hysterically, like you know, hiccuping and crying, and Lee never cried, ever.
Witnesses on the Alabama trip told police that Terry had threatened to hold a press conference. Matlock says while he and Terry were dating, she told him something that happened in her past that she wasn't proud of.
She said, I feel nasty about what I've done.
What was she talking about? You'll hear when we come back in 2 minutes. Tonight, you're hearing for the first time from friends of Lee Terry, friends who say they question if her death was really a suicide. We're the only station they trust to share their story.
And I literally thought she was joking, and I'm like,
Roy Matlock dated Lee Terry for a year and a half. He says Terry told him what she said she had done to get out of a DUI.
and she said, I feel nasty about what I've done. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she says, I told you I slept with the judge in order to get out of my charges.
Amos says Terry told her the same thing.
She was like, Natalie, I was out of options. It was that, or I was looking at serious jail time.
Amos is also skeptical that Terry committed suicide. Several of Terry's friends say she never would have killed herself without first making sure her dog Lana was taken care of.
The last thing that would ever happen is she would leave her dog like that. I just don't believe it.
Lana was found on Terry's bed, alive but thin for going so long without food.
She loved that little dog. She worshiped this little dog. And I mean, Lana was her best friend. It was her companion. And I just, knowing what I know about Lee, she never would have put Lana in harm's way, ever. Ever.
There are other questions. The Stallman is a secure building. You swipe a key to get in, swipe again on the elevator to get to your floor.
He called me.
Donald Stamper was a friend of Terry's. He says he went to visit her about a week before her death. We interviewed him via FaceTime.
I'm sure that someone would be able to go up to the floor using the stairs because I did it. I don't know if that happened, but I think it should be looked into.
Stamper says he entered the building when someone else had the door open, rode the elevator with them to their floor, then walked the rest of the way, knocking on Terry's door on the 9th floor.
She was so surprised and just said, "How did you get in here? This place is so secure." She was blown away that I made it in.
Terry's friends have more questions about the death investigation. What happened to Terry's iPad? And why didn't police try to recover a backup of its contents online? Why didn't police probe the allegations of possible misconduct by a judge? Judge Moreland wasn't interviewed until 2 months after Terry's body was discovered. The interview was in his office. It wasn't recorded. And he wasn't asked about any alleged sexual relationships with either Terry or Amos. Amos shared with us a text message exchange she says occurred between her and the judge the day after he was interviewed by police. Amos asking how it went, Moreland texting, "Didn't even ask if we were together." Police spokesman Don Aaron says that wasn't the focus of the detectives' investigation. Their job was to establish if Lee Terry's death was a suicide or something else. The scientific evidence, the detective concluded, determined she died at her own hand.
I just don't believe for a second that she killed herself. I just don't believe it. That's just not her style, you know. And I just think about how terrified she must have been, and yeah.
All these things make me question. I just have questions. And if she legitimately committed suicide and there was, in my opinion, a legitimate investigation, which I don't believe happened, then I can rest. But I just don't believe it.
Now, I asked Metro Police about reopening the death investigation. Police spokesman Don Aaron said this: "Our conclusion that this is a suicide was based on the totality of the evidence and the science, and that at this point we don't have anything to the contrary." In airing the opinions of Lee Terry's friends, we're not implying the police investigation into the death reached a faulty conclusion. We're going to continue to follow up with our series.
If someone you love has a problem with drugs and breaks the law, you'd want them to get help and a second chance. Tonight, the Channel 4 I-Team looks into a special program set up in Metro's General Sessions Court. It's credited with giving some people a fresh start. But when the I-Team's Nancy Amos took a closer look, she found problems. Nancy is here. Nancy?
Well, that's right. Our investigative series, Influence, Infidelity, and Men in Power, has taken a close look at General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland. Tonight, we look at the drug court that Moreland founded, a court he was forced to step away from after our I-Team investigation. 93 defendants are here for court today, but they're all about to be sent home. Channel 4's I-Team is here.
Wow. Whoa, it's the news.
They just let everyone out because Channel 4 was there? I'd gone in, no camera, to sit and listen to see what happens in drug court. Suddenly, the staff dismissed everyone early.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Hey, thanks for coming. Woo! Yeah, I got a free day. We'd
been getting tips about drug court ever since we first aired stories about Judge Casey Moreland. He used to oversee drug court until he stepped down from that docket last month after our I-Team stories about allegations he had sex with two women who'd been defendants in General Sessions Court. Allegations we first asked him about in January.
Natalie and Lee and Natalie.
Our I-Team first reported that Moreland had exchanged graphic text with Natalie Amos, a woman with whom he was having an extramarital affair. Some of those texts sent when Moreland was sitting on the bench. Since our investigation began, people have been suggesting cases we check out. One is the case of former drug court defendant Jerry Dylan Burkhart. Take a look at this social media post from January. Burkhart isn't supposed to have a gun. He's a convicted felon. And to this woman, Burkhart's story is an example of what she believes is wrong with Moreland's drug court.
It's a joke. I think it's a joke.
She asked us not to show her face. Burkhart fathered a child with her daughter.
And he just kept picking up just random charges.
Drug court, she feels, has not held Burkhart accountable for his actions. He had a felony theft conviction from Cheatham County in 2011, followed by a 2012 DUI in Nashville.
A Nashville man spent the last hours of his birthday in a jail cell.
Then in 2015, police say Burkhart had been drinking. He shot out the window in his apartment building. His own baby was inside. Court records show he served 3 months. He was sentenced to rehab, then to Judge Moreland's drug court, even though their own guidelines say they won't accept anyone with weapons charges. While on probation in February 2016, Burkhart was charged with driving on a revoked license and giving a fake name. Well, instead of sending Burkhart to jail, Moreland sentenced him to time served. He did less than 4 hours in jail.
He may have helped numerous people with his drug court, but from what I've seen with Dylan, it's just a joke. I mean, if you can go in and get off that many times, that's a waste of taxpayer money.
Burkhart's been flaunting his ability to get out of trouble, posting this on social media. "They let me drive away with warrants and no license," he wrote, "and I had a crack pipe and needles." According to court records, Burkhart now does have outstanding warrants. We looked to see if Burkhart had any connections to others we've been reporting about. His defense attorney in 2015 was Sean McKinney. That name surfaced in text messages between the judge and his girlfriend, Natalie Amos. The judge telling her Sean was his travel buddy. In another text to Amos, Moreland wrote he had Sean's condo in the Gulch all week. Judge Moreland started drug court in 2003. There are a lot of successes, to be sure. We've interviewed graduates before.
I didn't like him that day. He sent me to jail.
But now?
I love him.
A life-changing experience. But the court's own numbers show there are far more who don't graduate. Last year, there were 34 graduations, but 157 participants. Some Metro General Sessions judges have told me they're distancing themselves from drug court. This email from Judge Mike Mondelli, February 10th, warning the DA and public defender he's not approving any cases where a referral to drug court is involved. Judge Mondelli told me he's lost confidence in drug court. Another well-known friend of Judge Moreland's also had close ties to drug court, Brian Lewis. Remember, he and Moreland traveled to Alabama together last year. The following week, one of the women who'd been on the trip committed suicide. Lewis was the president of the foundation that raises money for the drug court. Moreland mentioned it last year in a Metro budget hearing.
The foundation does a lot to support the drug court.
Lewis resigned from the Drug Court Foundation in late February after our I-Team stories began airing. The drug court founded by Judge Casey Moreland for now is continuing.
There should be some kind of second strike, third strike, that's it.
But under closer scrutiny than ever before.
Now, I reached out to Sean McKinney to ask him about the Burkhart case. So far, I've not heard back. We also want to make it clear there are 2 drug courts in Davidson County. This is different from Judge Seth Norman's program, which is for felony defendants.
Tonight, the district attorney is questioning a legal decision he says was made essentially behind his back. And once again, this story revolves around the actions of Metro Judge Casey Moreland. Moreland has stepped aside from some of his duties while an ethics board and other agencies investigate his behavior on and off the bench. You've heard allegations that the judge may have helped women he was romantically involved with avoid penalties and fines in court cases. Well, tonight, a new example that again raises questions about preferential treatment. It begins with an accused drunk driver facing his second DUI. That driver is the judge's future son-in-law. The arrest report tells a dangerous, potentially deadly story. In the wee hours of October 30th, 2015, a man in a black Toyota 4Runner drove the wrong way onto I-40, heading east in the westbound lane. A Metro police officer managed to get him safely off the highway into a nearby parking lot. The driver was 26-year-old Christopher Plattenberg, who, according to police, admitted drinking that night. In fact, when the officer asked, on a scale of 1 to 10, how impaired he might be, Plattenberg answered 1,002. Records show his blood was drawn at General Hospital to test for alcohol. Then Christopher Plattenberg was taken to jail and booked for DUI. It would be his second drunk driving arrest in 2 years. A second offense DUI is a serious crime in Tennessee with serious consequences. The law calls for jail time, starting at 45 days, up to just shy of a year. A mandatory fine of $600 to $3,500. You can lose your license for 2 years, lose your car altogether. There's a mandatory alcohol and drug treatment program, and the judge can order an ignition interlock device on your vehicle at your expense. So what happened to accused second-time offender Chris Plattenberg? The court records are interesting. After getting out of jail on his own recognizance, he first appeared before Judge Casey Moreland in early January of last year, 3 months after the DUI arrest. The judge continued the case until March. Ultimately, Judges Gail Robinson and Aaron Holt took over, allowing Plattenberg to plead guilty to a lesser charge of reckless endangerment. According to the court records, he agreed to a suspended sentence of 11 months and 29 days, a fine of $350, an alcohol counseling class, 60 hours of public service work, 10 days in jail, and the installation of an interlock device. But then it appears something changed. In an undated order signed by Judge Gail Robinson, the court declared him indigent, waiving his court costs and probation fees. A document with Judge Moreland's type name but signed by Judge Aaron Holt appears to strike the interlock device. And a month later, there is an email from the sheriff's office to the criminal court clerk saying, recall the committal on Christopher Plattenberg. In other words, waive the 10 days in jail. He is, quote, time served per Judge Moreland. Now, we checked. The total time Plattenberg served in jail was 3 hours and 21 minutes on the October night he was first arrested. The timing of every decision in this case is critical when you consider the fact that Christopher Plattenberg is now engaged to marry Judge Casey Moreland's daughter. Their online bridal registry tells the story. The two began dating in December of 2015, less than 2 months after Chris's DUI arrest. By the time the case started moving through the courts, they were a couple, and they've been dating steadily ever since. After his plea bargain in March and Judge Moreland's forgiveness of his jail time in April, Plattenberg apparently asked Casey that summer for his daughter's hand. On October 8th, he proposed. A November wedding is planned. We brought the file to the attention of the district attorney's office. After all, they had to agree to any plea bargain and sign off on all the terms. DA Glenn Funk says they had no idea jail time had been erased. Quote, "These facts are very disturbing. Our office was unaware that the negotiated disposition of this case was altered without notice to the state. The state has a right to be heard on any sentencing matter. Generally, this office does not oppose judicial waiver of fines and costs for indigent defendants. However, when a defendant seeks a waiver of a specifically negotiated probation requirement, such as installation of an interlock device, then the state must be given notice of this application. For a judge to waive service of an agreed-upon jail sentence without notice to the state is improper. Given that this defendant appears to have a personal connection to the judge, the actions are even more concerning." Funk goes on to say, "I shared this information with federal authorities who are investigating Judge Casey Moreland. At this time, the U.S. Attorney's Office has asked me to defer to their investigation." And we have asked the court system whether Christopher Plattenberg performed the 60 hours of community service and attended that alcohol class he agreed to. As of this afternoon, we still don't have an answer. We're told that matter is being reviewed by the Metro Legal Department.
Our Channel 4 I-Team has been focusing attention on Nashville's General Sessions Drug Court.
It's drawn attention because of allegations raised about Judge Casey Moreland, that he exchanged favorable outcomes in court for sexual favors. Well, tonight, the I-Team's Nancy Amos looks into a member of the court treatment team who also runs halfway houses, where judges send defendants for court-ordered treatment.
This is Harrington Avenue in Madison. There are 8 halfway houses on this street. Most of them have 8 residents each. They're primarily people with drug or alcohol charges who were sent here by a judge. Before Judge Casey Moreland stepped aside from his duties as drug court judge, this is where some of the people he sentenced ended up. But as we've often found when looking into the way drug court operates, cameras aren't always welcome.
I'm Nancy from Channel 4, by the way.
She's one of the housing directors.
You can't have cameras pointing at the houses.
The houses on Harrington Avenue are owned or operated by a nonprofit called Recovery Community, Inc. Lynn Nolan is the executive director. You'll find her picture on the General Sessions Court's website under treatment court staff and providers.
We really enjoy helping them and seeing the growth.
Some former graduates have glowing commentaries about Recovery Community, Inc., like this woman. She posted on their Facebook page that she was a broken and lost woman. Now she's truly blessed to be a resident. But we've also heard from people who question what they consider a too cozy arrangement between Nolan's program and Casey Moreland. We'll call this person Butch. He was in Nolan's treatment program.
She referred to Casey as a confidant, and that they talked about things related to other matters other than the drug program.
Recovery Community, Inc. is not a government agency. Lynn Nolan is not a Metro employee. But credit card records we obtained under the Open Records Act show Nolan traveled with Moreland and others to conventions, including a trip to California. That travel was billed to Metro taxpayers with Moreland's approval, until Metro auditors caught it and said no, taxpayers shouldn't pay for people who aren't city employees.
She referred to it one time as a junket, and just talked about what a great deal it was and what a good time she had.
I don't have anything to do with all the financial matters in that. I'm really just here to help people. I'm not an accountant.
Did you not know that the city was paying for your travel?
I'm sure you have all that records.
Do you think it was right for the Metro taxpayers to pay for your travel?
I I mean, I didn't know that they were paying for my travel.
City auditors found out and asked for reimbursement. Moreland's friend, prominent attorney Brian Lewis, wrote a check to cover the expenses. At the time, he was president of a foundation that raises money for Moreland's drug court. Insiders who've been in the recovery community program tell us something else that bothered them. They said when the houses on Harrington Avenue needed maintenance or upgrades, clients were told to do the work as part of their community service time.
A carpenter, he's at the top of the list to work there because he can do drywall, and a plumber. He can work on our bathrooms in those houses.
Nolan says she hires tradespeople to work on the houses, but says yes, sometimes clients help.
I say, well, what do you know how to do? Well, I can, paint. Okay, well, we can paint something.
But it's not mandatory.
No.
Now, the people who stay in the houses pay $140 a week for rent. Multiply that times 8 people, that's about $5,000 a month in rent for each house. And add to that the grant money they get, about $95,000 a year. Their financial statements show that Recovery Community, Inc. is more than breaking even. Nancy Amos, Channel 4 News.
This looks like a firing squad.
A Nashville judge learns the Channel 4 I-team approaching his bench was just the beginning. Now he faces the feds. A criminal indictment and stunning claims of a cover-up puts a Nashville judge in handcuffs. A startling result of months of investigations by the Channel 4 I-team. How it all unfolded now on Channel 4 News at 5.
Live with breaking news. This is Channel 4 News at 5.
We have been calling our Channel 4 I-team investigation into Judge Casey Moreland, influence, infidelity, and men in power. Today, we learned those words may just scratch the surface.
That's right. Now there are new claims, including a cover-up and bribery. We begin with the Channel 4 I-team reporter who first broke this story, Nancy Amos. Nancy, we saw your stories mentioned often in today's affidavit.
That's right. You know, we've done a lot of stories about Judge Casey Moreland, and today the U.S. Attorney's Office announced that the FBI took him into custody early this morning at his sister's house. They started investigating him after our series of Channel 4 I-team investigations, which have been going on for about 2 months now. Today's bombshell, as they say, Moreland tried to bribe a witness. Judge Moreland appeared in court the way he's used to seeing the defendants before him, shackled hand and foot. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced they took him into custody because they feared he was jeopardizing their investigation. Just in the last weeks, they say Moreland attempted to pay a $5,000 bribe to get a witness to recant her story. She's not named in the complaint, but it's Natalie Amos. She told the Channel 4 I-team she had sex with Moreland and that he dropped her fines and fees and prevented her arrest during a traffic stop. The U.S. Attorney's Office says Moreland used a go-between to try to get Amos to sign an affidavit saying it was all a lie.
The scheme was to be carried out using intermediaries identified in the complaint as CS1 and CS2. To carry out the scheme, Moreland told CS1 to get person 1, and I quote, liquored up real good before presenting her with the affidavit to sign.
But in fact, an FBI agent signed the affidavit. Amos never saw it or the money. The criminal complaint also says Moreland tried to get a police officer to plant drugs in Amos's car in an attempt to destroy her credibility. Moreland will stay locked up until a hearing Friday. His attorney, Peter Stryantz, argued he should be released. He isn't a flight risk. Stryantz says Moreland is in a state of shock.
He's obviously in a bit of a state of shock. Certainly didn't expect to be awoken by the Federal Bureau of Investigation at 6 o'clock this morning with a search warrant.
Moreland will be held in a Kentucky jail until Friday. This is just the beginning of the federal case against him. Now, these charges today involve incidents that have happened just in the last month. These charges alone, if Judge Moreland is convicted, carry a possible penalty of 35 years in prison. Reporting live at the federal courthouse, Nancy Amos, Channel 4 News.
Stunning developments in a controversy first exposed by the Channel 4 I-team. Embattled Judge Casey Moreland will resign as of next week.
That's right, and this announcement came during a federal hearing on whether or not Moreland should stay in jail and if the case should be sent to the grand jury. The judge found probable cause that Moreland did try to obstruct a criminal investigation by tampering and bribing witnesses. Channel 4's Alana Altler was in the courtroom and joins us now live outside the federal courthouse with the very latest. Alana?
Jeremy Tracy, that resignation was announced while lawyers were debating whether or not Casey Moreland should stay in jail. Today, he was uncuffed as he walked into the courtroom, but he was wearing an olive green jumpsuit. Federal prosecutors argued that Moreland should stay in jail because of some disturbing information they found on his phone. A list of 13 witnesses the FBI feared he would try to intimidate. Today, federal prosecutors played 4 audio recordings and a video to present their case. This is breaking news right now. I'm just getting word from Natalie Amos, who is inside the courtroom, that he is going to be released. Casey Moreland, again, is going to be released. This is after more than 3 hours of witness testimony inside the federal court here in downtown Nashville. Again, Casey Moreland will be released from jail while this criminal investigation pans out. Today, we heard recorded calls between Moreland and a confidential source who was actually working for the FBI. In those phone calls, Moreland gives information about a witness's license plate and registration, and the feds argue it was part of a plan to plant drugs in the witness's car, a witness who happened to be Moreland's former mistress. In another call, Moreland agreed to pay an additional $1,000 to the witness in order for her to sign an affidavit that basically recanted her statements to the Channel 4 I-team. Investigators state he had already paid out $5,100 for an alleged bribery scheme. We also learned he had tried to relay 2 messages to the former mistress, who was also the witness. And this is kind of interesting, guys. He had asked the confidential source to ask her why she was doing this, why she was keep doing this. And also the second message was that he was sorry, he never meant for this to happen, and it, quote, ain't his fault, unquote. Now, Casey Moreland's wife also took the stand, as well as a long childhood friend. His wife said that he was a loving father and a loving husband, and that she would be okay if he was released to their home in Old Hickory if the judge allowed for it. Federal prosecutors said they didn't want him to be released from jail because if he was at home, he had access to phones, he had access to visitors, and who knows what could happen because of that. Of course, because of these new stunning developments, we realize that, yes, he is going to resign effective April 4th, and it does appear, based on Natalie Amos reporting, that he will be released from jail. Reporting live from the federal courthouse, I'm Alana Altler, Channel 4 News.
Tonight, recordings that reveal a judge's alleged plan to plant drugs in a witness's car. Good evening and welcome to Channel 4 News at 10. We expect to see judges in their robes, not a jail jumpsuit.
Today, Judge Casey Moreland entered the courtroom in shackles and inmate's clothing. Moreland won't be a judge for long, but he will sleep in his own bed again tonight. We'll get to the decisions made in court today. First, Channel 4's Liz Loheis has the newly released recordings.
That's right, Tom and Demetria. The former judge is in more hot water. The assistant U.S. attorney says they have recordings of Casey Moreland talking about his plans to bribe and frame Natalie Amos.
Investigators say an old friend of Casey Moreland's admits he was planning on helping the former judge discredit Natalie Amos.
I said, so if you pulled Natalie over and she had drugs on her, that wouldn't look good. He said, no, that wouldn't look good at all.
Prosecutors say that's the friend's voice, talking to Moreland, seen in this video. He's reportedly talking about planting drugs in Natalie's car and then having a police officer pull her over. It's all recorded because that friend was approached by the FBI. Prosecutors say that friend agreed to be an informant in hopes of receiving leniency. Moreland reportedly offered to pay Natalie thousands to take back everything she said during the I-team's exclusive interview. He wanted her to sign this affidavit for $6,000. She was supposed to say she was paid by Channel 4 to do the interview. She was not paid. Natalie told our I-team she wanted to do the interview because she was scared for her life.
She does know she's got to read it out loud, and you record her, don't you?
I'm gonna tell her. I'll do my best.
Investigators say Natalie never had plans to sign it, but the informant led Moreland to believe she would, and Moreland was ready to offer up more money.
We'll take care of whoever I'm backing up to.
Okay.
If I have to have a little more, we'll have a little more.
In some of the conversations, Moreland gets personal.
Will you ask her one question? Why? Why would she do this to me?
Okay.
And in a later conversation,
tell her this.
Yes, sir, Judge.
Tell her I am so sorry that I did not ever mean anything like this to happen, and it ain't my fault.
The charge against Moreland is attempting to obstruct justice through bribery and witness tampering. If convicted of that charge, he faces up to 20 years in prison.
You have heard the name Brian Lewis on our newscast many times.
He's a lawyer who was first disciplined along with former Judge Casey Moreland in the David Chase domestic violence case. The judge let Chase leave jail early after a request from attorney Brian Lewis. And since January, we've been reporting on the mysterious suicide of Brian Lewis's lover. She had just returned from a trip with Lewis and Judge Moreland. Well, tonight, an exclusive interview with a man who knows attorney Lewis quite well, his own brother. He talked exclusively to the I-Team's Nancy Amos.
Brad Lewis's tattoos paint a portrait of a pretty rough character. But he says his older brother, who's been in the news a lot lately, prominent Nashville attorney Brian Lewis, he says he is even rougher.
I think he is a menace to society.
Brian Lewis's name has been mentioned often in our investigation into former General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland. Lewis and Moreland have been longtime friends and travel buddies.
Him and my brother were thick as thieves, They went everywhere together.
Moreland resigned effective April 4th. That's after he was charged with trying to bribe his former lover, Natalie Amos, and have drugs planted on her. Amos had told police last year she was suspicious about the death of her former roommate, Lee Terry. Terry was Brian Lewis's lover. Police concluded that Terry committed suicide last May in the apartment that Brian Lewis rented for her. Brad Lewis, Brian's brother, is speaking publicly for the first time, only to the Channel 4 I-Team. Brad Lewis says he has concerns about the death of Lee Terry. Well, he has no evidence it was anything but a suicide. He says he's often wondered if his brother drove her to it.
He could have threatened her and maybe she thought that she was going to die anyways. I think the Lee Terry death investigation needs to be looked at harder because my brother has a tendency for violence, mental manipulation. He's a thug with a law license. He is a thug with a law license.
The brothers became estranged 8 years ago. Brad Lewis says tension is escalating because he says his brother knows he turned over information to federal prosecutors. Prosecutors investigating Casey Moreland in a public corruption case.
And you feel strongly enough about what your brother has done that you were willing to talk to the FBI about it?
Absolutely. 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 I know how I've felt these past 8 years with the threat and intimidation, and it's not a good feeling. Not a good feeling whatsoever.
Brad Lewis says he made authorities aware of an incident involving his brother in 2004. It concerns claims that Brian Lewis had a role in the alleged beating of a man he suspected was stealing from him. A man on a crew doing electrical work at Brian Lewis's home on Ashland City Highway.
My brother was renovating his house for resale.
It was 2004. Metro Records confirmed that Massey Electric was the electrical contractor. Brad Lewis says his brother told him how he had that worker beaten in a back room at the Massey Electric office.
They choked, tortured this guy for an undisclosed amount of time. I was told that if this guy brought this to the attention of the authorities, that he would be killed, his family would be killed, and that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I heard it from my brother's mouth.
What was his demeanor like as he was telling you that?
He thought it was funny.
He thought it was funny?
Yeah, sure did.
And they beat his ass.
Brian Meyer was another electrical worker on that job.
I've only shared it with a small group of people.
Meyer is a mechanic. In 2004, he was an electrician's apprentice at Massey Electric. Meyer says he unknowingly bought some hunting gear his coworker had stolen from Brian Lewis's job site. Meyer says Brian Lewis called him and made threats.
What did he say?
He was like, look, man, I know you got my stuff and everything. Oh, man, you don't give me my stuff back. I'm going to find out who your family is. I'm going to find out them, and I'm going to kill them, and I'm going to kill you. And I'm like, he's like, I got connections with the mob and all that stuff. And I'm like, what?
Did you take him seriously when he said he was going to kill you,
yeah.
Your family?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this guy's got power. How can you not sit there and fear somebody that's got power?
Meyer says Brian Lewis showed up with a lot of squad cars. Then he was handcuffed and taken before a night court commissioner.
Next thing I know, I look over and door opens up. There's Brian Lewis over the judge's thing going, "I got you." Tapping on the glass going, "I got you, son of a bitch."
Brian Lewis was behind the glass where the judge was?
Yeah.
Did you think that was unusual?
Oh, yeah, you know, there's the guy who's accused me of stealing his shit. He's right there, you know, and I'm like, what?
Did you have the feeling things were not going to go well?
Oh yeah, I already heard the taps already being played. It was done. I was done.
Court records show that Meyer took a plea deal. He pled guilty to a felony and got 4 years probation and had to pay restitution to Brian Lewis.
And it was mostly like, well, this is what they want.
Who wants?
Brian Lewis. That's what Brian Lewis wanted. He's like, you have two options, pay him or go to prison for 10 years.
Meyer ended up paying Brian Lewis $10,000 in restitution. Every receipt, a painful memory.
You can see where there's money values all the way down that I've written in too on each date.
What'd that feel like?
Yeah, it hurt. I worked my butt off just to pay that. It rammed me. I mean, I didn't have a chance.
The other worker, he says, was never charged. We tried to find him, but his last name is listed as unknown in the police report.
Ask me what happened to me.
Meyer says he ran into him about a year later.
He goes, they beat me up, took me to my house, got all his stuff back, and then they made me work at Massey until I paid restitution back to Brian Lewis. They was garnishing my paychecks. And I was like, what?
I contacted Nathan Massey, the owner of the company, to ask him about the incident involving the theft from Brian Lewis's house. Massey told me he had no recollection of it. When I asked about the employee who Meyer says was beaten in the back room, Massey said, "I don't have anything else to offer you." Massey ran for a House seat last year. It was a nasty race. He lost to Bo Mitchell. And Massey does have ties to the drug court that former Judge Casey Moreland used to run. Remember those halfway houses in Madison where Moreland would send drug court clients? Massey sat on the board of directors for the nonprofit that owns the houses. We've been able to corroborate many of the details of the theft through court records, but we haven't found any court records corroborating the allegations of the beating at Massey Electric, and we can't corroborate other claims by Brad Lewis and Brian Meyer.
Known him all my life. All my life.
Brian Lewis has had a long career in the public light. His brother says he's seen a different side.
It's just all about control and power and money, you know. That's with him, that's it. That's life.
Now, the story contains some strong allegations, and with every story I've done involving Brian Lewis, I've asked for his side of the story. He did not return my email or phone calls. I did hear from an attorney today representing Brian. He's Rich McGee. He says Brian Lewis has filed an order of protection yesterday against his brother Brad. The order alleges that Brad had threatened to kill Brian in recent months and says Brian fears for his family's safety.
A young woman's death is raising questions tonight about how police use confidential informants.
Her grandparents say she was pressured, and before she died, their granddaughter saved some revealing text messages from detectives. The Channel 4 I-Team's Nancy Amos has our investigation.
Well, during our investigation into the death of Abriel Pritchard, I found a policy was in place that might have made a difference, but that policy wasn't followed.
She was my angel.
She always called me Papa.
She wasn't supposed to die.
To the adoring grandparents who raised her, 24-year-old Abriel Pritchard had a sweet spirit and a simple mind, an IQ in the 70s. Her co-workers called her Jukebox because she was always singing. To the police, Abriel was Purple Heart 23, a confidential informant, a CI.
I didn't know about the CI name until probably about a month ago.
Abriel died of a heroin overdose March 3, 2016, the autopsy reads. Her grandparents have a lot of questions about her interactions with Metro detectives in the month before her death.
I didn't realize these kind of things were going on where they take these kids with minor charges, force them into being a snitch, and then putting them back in a very dangerous situation.
She felt like she had no other chance, and if she didn't, she'd be going to prison.
Abriel OD'd in this house in Madison. Heroin and Xanax, the medical examiner says, injected behind her knee. A friend who was there called 911 in a panic.
Is she breathing? I don't know.
The friend says Abriel was unresponsive, so she put her in a bathtub and ran cold water on her. The call taker told her how to do chest compressions.
Start pumping. 1, 2, 3, 4.
But paramedics couldn't save her. The Pritchards went to the scene. They were not allowed inside.
And as a parent, you're there to protect your child, and you can't go in and even put a blanket over.
Her grandparents feel that Abriel never should have been working as a confidential informant. She was on probation for a drug offense, had been passing her drug tests.
Why do you take a kid who's in treatment? I don't understand that at all. The kid's trying to turn her life around. She's in treatment. And to become a snitch, you basically are being put back in the same environment to make a drug buy.
Abriel saved a series of text messages she exchanged with 2 Metro detectives.
The first text says that I'll call you in a little bit.
The Pritchards say they showed detectives pressured their granddaughter. In one text, Abriel asked to talk to the detective with her attorney present. The detective writes, "Never mind, I'll just take you to jail. I ain't playing these games. You either want to work or you don't." The detective texts, "I'll take out the warrants." The detective is firm, "I'm not meeting with your attorney." Another detective presses her to set up an undercover buy. "We got to do something soon, this afternoon or tomorrow afternoon." Her grandparents say the week before she died, Abriel told them she was scared about working with police and asked their advice.
No, stop, don't. It was real simple. I knew she could not deal with that type of pressure, and it was too dangerous.
We asked Metro Police for an interview about the use of confidential informants. They declined to talk even about their policies and wouldn't comment on Abriel Pritchard's case.
Detectives are put under a lot of pressure to get informants.
Gary Kemper retired from the Metro Police Department, most recently leading the gang and homicide units. He reviewed the case file at our request.
And the only way we can stop the drugs on the street is through informants. So they're a necessary evil, and I can understand what they were doing, trying to get an informant. Would I have put that much pressure on somebody for a street-level buyer? Probably not.
His kids aren't trained. The detectives are. And we understand that's the only way to get the big drug dealers is to use the little people. But when it's your child, it's a whole different ballgame.
Abriel was on probation for a drug charge, and according to court policy, she should not have been working as an informant.
And if someone had come to the probation officer and said, "I want to use her as a CI," the answer would have been?
No. No hesitation. No.
Not maybe.
Not maybe. No.
Bob Green is head of the General Sessions Probation Department. Green says allowing a probationer to work as a CI is against both court and probation policies and common sense.
It's not allowed. You just don't do it. It's a bad practice. It goes against every best practice that's established to change the lives of the people that are supervised on probation or parole.
The policy, though, is not in writing, and it's not clear who in the police department knows about it. Kemper knew.
In the past, we've used General Sessions, I know, but it was always cleared to their judge and their probation officer.
Green says Abriel Pritchard's probation officer didn't know.
There's nothing in the file whatsoever.
The judge in Abriel's case was former Judge Casey Moreland. We don't know if he approved her working as a CI or not, since we were not allowed to see her police CI file. But Kemper says in general, when asked, Moreland gave the okay.
He had no problem with it most of the time. I never had a problem out of Casey approving when we wanted things done.
There's a disconnect somewhere that raises more questions. Did the detectives in this case know that using probationers as CIs was against court policy? Is there a training issue? Because of our I-Team investigation, a written policy may be on the horizon.
We update our manual every year, so we'll probably put that in there.
The Pritchards have searched for answers for more than a year about why their granddaughter died. Had she slipped back into the drug culture, a slide that cost her her life? Her grandparents will always wonder if her death was something other than an accidental overdose. They've heard rumors that people she was with may have known she was an informant. They question whether the police closed the case without a thorough investigation.
I still feel like there were no answers. You know, they just wrote it off very quickly, shut it down, that, you know, she was a drug addict.
Nothing's going to bring our granddaughter back, but it's not right that they do this. It's not fair.
Now, the Pritchards came forward to tell their story, hoping that if other young people find themselves in the same situation, they'll talk to their parents. For the Channel 4i team, I'm Nancy Amos.
Sensitive information key in the case against a former judge goes missing. And tonight we have learned it's just been found, so where was it and who had access to it while it was gone? The I-Team's Nancy Amos is here.
When you hear the names involved, you'll understand why this missing iPhone is so important. Tonight's story involves the recent arrest of Natalie Amos. She was the judge's former lover, and the disappearance of this very cell phone that helped break the case open. A judge's former lover, Natalie Amos, sat in court Friday, this time a defendant. It's a vandalism case, a charge she believes is trumped up.
I definitely think this was, well, I know it was a setup.
Amos was arrested, charged with vandalizing a model apartment at the flats of Taylor Place on 5th Avenue North back in October. An affidavit says pictures were taken off the wall and there was a cut in a box spring. The apartment complex considered Amos a suspect. They say they found her phone in the damaged unit. Police then took her iPhone as evidence.
Right, a box spring that had a tear in it. According to the incident report, damage was less than $50. And they got a search warrant for the contents of my entire phone, which I found very bizarre.
When the police had finished processing the iPhone, the detective left her voicemail, saying she could pick it up at the property room.
Just calling to let you know that this phone of yours is available for pickup.
Amos went to the police property room Thursday, only to hear that no one could locate her phone. She started her voice recorder.
We've looked everywhere we can think to look.
Okay.
Are you recording me?
Yeah.
Because zillions of phones there. So what we would like to do is take your phone number because we really apologize for the inconvenience.
Here's why this particular missing iPhone is a big deal. Natalie Amos is a key witness in a federal public corruption case, a case against former General Sessions Judge Casey Moreland. It was a result of our News 4 I-Team investigation. We documented that Moreland helped Amos get out of a traffic stop and helped her get some past traffic fines dismissed. The two exchanged explicit text messages, even while he was on the bench. All those texts, as well as emails between Amos and the FBI, all that is in the misplaced iPhone, as well as information about the ongoing investigation.
I think there's a lot of people that obviously have some serious concerns about what I know and who I've shared that with.
The iPhone is all backed up, no evidence was lost, but Amos wonders who had access to the contents of her phone. Could a federal investigation be jeopardized?
I had journal entries in there, notes, so I definitely feel very exposed and have some additional safety concerns.
Monday morning, Metro Police spokesman Don Aaron said the missing iPhone had been located. It never left the property room, he said. It was found in a box of evidence in an unrelated case. Human error, Aaron said. Amos appeared in court Friday on that vandalism charge. She says she's not guilty. The idea that someone could be set up on a fake charge may seem far-fetched, but remember the history of this case. Moreland is under arrest right now, charged with trying to have someone plant drugs on Amos, then have police stop her. The FBI got it on tape. Moreland is set to go to trial in June.
The stress has been pretty overwhelming.
Meanwhile, Amos's vandalism case was continued until March. Friday was her first court appearance. Ironically, in the same courtroom, 4D, where former Judge Moreland used to preside. Now, for at least 4 days, the police department couldn't put their hands on this iPhone, although they say it never left the police property room. For the News 4 I-Team, I'm Nancy Amos. Back now to our Channel 4 I-Team investigation into an untold story from the Metro Courthouse. Here's Nancy Amos. Well, there was an incident in the courthouse in 2014 that briefly made headlines, and tonight a fellow judge of Casey Moreland opens up publicly for the first time about what happened. She's surprisingly candid about how our investigation into Moreland has changed their jobs as judges.
The Honorable Judge Melissa Blackburn presiding.
Judge Melissa Blackburn has never talked publicly about it before, a 2014 incident that caused her to leave the bench with a courtroom full of people in order to deal with an emergency involving Judge Casey Moreland. This is a text she got from one of her female staff members.
Can you come over here
Moreland is pitching an ungodly fit. I see that on my phone, and I'm thinking, what on earth is happening?
It happened here in her staff's offices.
But he was pulling stuff out, ripping things off the walls.
Moreland, she says, was furious that her staff had moved into empty office space that he considered his, removing name signs off the doors, trying at one point to remove a computer from one office.
And the computer was basically pulled away, but they're mounted to the wall, so you can't do anything with them.
Blackburn had only been a judge for 2 months, she says. Her staff was terrified by Moreland, a 6-foot-tall judge in a robe yelling at them, accompanied by an armed court officer.
He intended to intimidate my employees. Some of them are crying. They're petrified. They're fearing for their own safety and fearing for their job. They were so upset. Several were threatening to resign.
Moreland denied raising his voice. He said this during an interview with our I-Team's Alana Altler.
I wasn't screaming or irate. I just asked her who gave her permission to move into my office. And I don't know if she had had a bad day or what. She just started crying, and the next words out of my mouth is, "Why are you crying?"
Well, he thought he could take me on and he could win because I was new and I was a woman, and I refused to let him. I absolutely positively would not let him control me.
There's an interesting twist to the story you've never heard before. Blackburn filed a complaint against Moreland with a board that disciplines judges. And to defend himself, Moreland took a lie detector test. He denied that he spoke unprofessionally, denied grabbing the computer. The polygraph, we now know, was given at the office of Moreland's close friend, attorney Brian Lewis.
What struck me as odd were there were only 3 questions asked, and that to me seemed very strange.
The Board of Judicial Conduct concluded there weren't sufficient grounds to discipline Judge Moreland. But they are looking at him now, and so is the FBI, for possible public corruption charges. It was prompted by our Channel 4 I-Team investigation. We found Moreland had erased his future son-in-law's jail sentence for a DUI. And we told you that Moreland did favors for 2 women with DUI charges, women who said they'd had sex with him. While our stories were running, Moreland stayed on the bench until the very day U.S. Marshals arrested him.
It was very, very tense around here, the days and weeks between when the investigation was going so heavily and he was still in the courthouse. We were all very much on edge.
Blackburn says to her the most stunning revelation is that an FBI informant recorded Moreland, the judge seen on video, arranging to set up one of the women he'd had sex with, Natalie Amos, by planting drugs on her and having her stopped by the police.
Is he going to be the one to pull her over?
But he'll be the one to pull her over. But he's just said, you know, his main thing was like, as long as it don't come back to me.
Once you go there, you've gone off the deep end. You've really done something that you just cannot undo. I cannot fathom that.
The U.S. Attorney's Office says Moreland also tried to bribe Amos, saying he planned to offer her more than $5,000 to say she lied to Channel 4 and to say that the X-rated texts he sent her from the bench were fakes. To Blackburn, those texts changed the way the public sees its judges.
Every time you walk out on that bench, you know that everyone is looking at you, thinking, what have you done? Who are you texting? What are you doing?
An element of trust has been lost.
I think so.
You'll raise your right hand.
A new judge has been sworn in to take Moreland's place, Sam Coleman. Now the task is restoring faith in the system.
There's not an easy fix. It's just us doing what we're supposed to do.
Casey Moreland is under house arrest for those witness tampering charges. Federal prosecutors have said their full corruption investigation could take a year. For the I-Team, I'm Nancy Amos.